You cannot trust your feelings. A good illustration of that is you go to a movie. It's a horror movie. You're sitting in there and you're scared to death. Is the danger real? No, it's not real. You feel it. It appears to you like it's real, but it's not really real. And so we can't trust our feelings, okay? So, why did God test Abraham? That's the big question. Here it is. God is not in the religion business. What's He in? The relationship business. God wants to prove to Abraham He's in the relationship business, that He cares about him. God shows Abraham that He is faithful regardless of the circumstances. This assures us that God will fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. Okay? Remember, your God is not whom you say your God is. Your God is whom you obey. In the New Testament, in Hebrews 11:6, it says the following.
And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him.
Okay, without faith it is impossible to please God. Okay? We have to exercise faith. Abraham says, God, I don't know how you're going to get out of this situation, but that's up to you. It's not up to me. Abraham literally believed that God would raise Isaac from the dead. Genesis 22:4-5.
On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you."
Why was Abraham so sure that God would even raise him from the dead? Because the covenant was conditioned upon the fact that Isaac had to live. That was the whole point. He had to create descendants. Isaac had to live. If God wants to slay him, He's got to bring him back. That's all there is to it. Hebrews 11:17-19.
By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death.
All right, here's the question. Who else took their son, their only son, and sacrificed him? God. And here's Isaac. Isaac's now 13 years old. That means old Abe is how old? 113 years old. Now, I don't know if you've seen any 13-year-old kids lately, but most of the ones I've seen could pretty well whip up a 113-year-old man. I mean, a couple of kicks and a karate chop, and Abe's out of the picture. Yet Isaac, he knows what's about to happen. And yet he puts the wood on his back and walks up this hill and allows himself to be tied down to this altar to be sacrificed. Who else placed the wood on his back, walked up a hill in this same area, and willingly laid down his life? Jesus, okay? Jesus willingly obeyed the Father, even though it was a Roman cross, in this very same place, okay? God provides a substitute sacrifice in the case of Abraham. Abraham's son did not die. God provided a ram in the bush, okay? This is a picture that God set out to do from the very beginning. God knew it was going to happen. The penalty for sin was death. God intended to pay it. You and I owe a debt that we can't pay. And so God has paid it for us. This sacrifice is played over and over again in the Bible. Our assurance that God will keep His promise of salvation is that our contract is signed in Jesus' blood, okay? In the Old Testament, the sacrifice was only a covering, okay? The first place we see it, the fig leaves for Adam and Eve. The skins of the animals where God slayed the animals and gave the skins to Adam and Eve to cover up their sin, okay? Then we see it here, Isaac. We see a substitute, the ram in the bushes, okay? And then later on, we get to Egypt, and the Jewish people are living under bondage in Egypt, okay? And they have the Passover, and they had to take the blood of a lamb and cover the mantle. Incidentally, they had to cover the inside of the mantle. You couldn't see it from the outside. They had to go on the inside. And actually, if you read how it is in the Old Testament, they had to take the hyssop branch and they had to make the sign of the cross to make it happen. Incredibly. Then we see every day in the daily sacrifices in the temple, it was a daily reminder to every single Jew just how vile their sin was to God. Only because He called them His people was there any hope whatsoever. Okay? In the New Testament, however, it's now no longer a covering. It's now a solution, okay? God himself, in the form of Jesus, who is the perfect, willing substitute sacrifice, will pay the price for us. Why blood? It is the living symbol of life. Everything you need is carried in the blood. Leviticus 17:11 says the following.
For the life of a creature is in the blood, and I have given it to you to make atonement for yourselves on the altar. It is the blood that makes atonement for one's life.
Okay, God produces through a miracle birth a new nation of people called Jews. 2,000 years later, in this very spot, God will produce another new nation. It's called Christians, after the death of Jesus Christ. The Jewish nation would exist. Eventually they would be dispersed throughout the whole world. Throughout the whole world, there are Jewish people everywhere. Coincidentally, they have never been assimilated into any culture, okay? No other ancient nation has ever ceased to exist and then returned to take its place on the world stage. Jesus himself prophesies the return of the Jews as a nation in Matthew 24:32 through 35. He says that the Jewish nation will be hauled off to captivity and that they would return to the promised land only after being scattered to almost every country in the world for 2,000 years. But the covenant was up to God to make happen, not to Abraham. Okay? God proves that he is in control 700 years before Jesus Christ and 2,700 years before the actual event. God declares through the prophet Isaiah how preposterous the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant is. It's found in Isaiah 66:8.
Who has ever heard of such a thing? Who has ever seen such things? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children.
Can a country be born in a day? On one day, May 14th, 1948, Israel resurrects to become a nation. Of all the barren land that they could have chosen in the whole wide world, they decide to choose the exact same land that God gave them in the Abrahamic covenant. You think that's a coincidence? I don't think so, okay? The events that led up to this prophecy being fulfilled were so out of the control of man that only God could make it happen. In Abraham, not only is the plan for the Jews revealed, but the plan for Gentiles or Christians, okay? For the whole world. The Messiah will come and bless the whole world through the Abrahamic covenant and through Abraham and his descendants, okay? This will become very important when we get to prophecy, which is the last lesson, okay? God has made a contract with the Jews and with the Gentiles. He shows us that he has fulfilled the Abrahamic covenant, and he has done that in yours and my lifetime on May 14th, 1948. The fulfillment of the land part of the Abrahamic covenant is an absolute miracle, and it took place while you and I lived, okay? You and I have watched as God has proven that he is in control. This is just one way that he proves to us as Gentiles that he will fulfill his covenant to you and I. That concludes Lesson 2. The next session we're going to look at the 3 other covenants that are given in the Old Testament that you have to know before we move to the New Testament. And we're going to take some questions here. You do the same thing at home. We'll see you at the next session.